Good evening and welcome to Freeways Media YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do so and click on the button as well to receive notifications on the bell. And this evening I'm privileged to be talking to Angela Rose, and she's
Thank
here.
you. The privilege is all mine. Yes,
She's here all the way from America, and she became very interested in South Africa. Can I ask you how that happened?
Yeah, so it just became trending on X all of a sudden, and I really had no clue what was going on. And it seemed like a really big issue that was too big to not understand what was happening. And so I felt like there was a huge disconnect. Something wasn't right. Either the media is covering something or they're hiding something, and it just wouldn't make sense to me why they would want to do that. And so I just kind of wanted to understand what's actually going on here, and I think that the best way of doing that is looking at it, being here, because I mean, seeing videos is one thing, but getting a feel for what the day-to-day life is like is another thing, to understand what's true, and if the media is gaslighting us, which, do you know what like gaslighting means?
I have a vague idea. Yes, I've kind of looked it up once, but I tend to, I don't use the term myself, so, you know, it's kind of,
yeah.
But I understand it's when you're creating kind of an publicity or something around something for,
yeah, to me, it's
ends.
manipulation. It's, you see something the way that it is. You see the videos. We've seen people share their accounts about what's happening in South Africa, and then they're like, no, what you're seeing is not real. And they'll just keep telling you that. And then you're like, am I crazy? You know, and that's what gaslighting to me is. And so I wanted to come here and see what's going on.
But you're an accomplished YouTuber yourself. You've been doing YouTube videos for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also part of your interest in creating a discussion around the issue.
Yeah, because I've taken it a part of my mission to share with other people what's going on, and so that was another reason to come. So not only can I figure it out for myself, but hopefully people have trust in me to be like, these are facts.
Yes, and well, we've talked a little bit about, you know, Black economic empowerment in South Africa, and the fact that you know, we've got all these quotas, and you know, even in sports teams, do you know that if you've got a sports team on the field and it's got less than a certain number of Black people in it, then you can get a fine.
That's
the
really
sports
ridiculous.
Team can get a fine, or it can actually lose the match. Because
okay.
you know, for example, they've got certain rules depending on what sports it is, and say there are 11 people in a team, and 6 of them have got to be Black. Mm-hmm. So maybe if it drops to 5, and they win the match, but then they would the authorities would say they've lost because they didn't have 6 Black people on the field all the time, and that goes especially for a sport like rugby, because that used to be a traditionally white sport, and Black people play soccer. So you would find in a soccer team, there's 100% Black people, but nobody cares about that. There's no quota for white soccer players.
Yeah.
But there's a quota for rugby players. There's got to be a certain number of Black players on the field all the time.
It's funny because, like, I see some parallels, and it's like there's trans men who want to compete in women's boxing, but how many women are going, hey, I want to compete with the men now?
Yeah, that's another completely
I think like there's just like the whole inclusivity topic is also very interesting to see how it's been working here and how it's been working in the US, and kind of comparing and contrasting that so far is pretty interesting.
Well, of course, a lot of the ideas being implemented by the government in South Africa originated in America. Things like affirmative action, and yes,
DEI.
DEI and that sort of thing, inclusivity. We hear that word all the time. Inclusive. It's got to be inclusive, inclusivity, and that sort of thing. It's quite strange because now there's almost this conflict between the US and South Africa, whereas I think our government, they're applying all these US concepts that they took from over there, almost completely. I mean, they used to be communists, but we no longer, and they were in Russia and East Germany and these places, but they no longer, they still use those terms like comrade and the working class and that sort of thing, but most of the political discourse originates more from America now rather than, say, the ex-Soviet Union. So that's rather strange, but now we're at loggerheads with America because of President Trump and the particular view he's taken, and of course his opposition to DEI and that sort of thing.
Sounds like his opposition in some ways to the ANC.
Yes. He doesn't seem to like them too much, I don't think, which is understandable. We don't like them either, but maybe, I don't know, who likes them? I mean, they're only getting 40% of the votes now anyway, but they're a horrible bunch. And I had an interview in Afrikaans with an economist. He's very well known here. He's got the same surname as me, and he reckons that over the last 30 years or so, the ANC has done tremendous damage to our economy.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. And I had another interview on this channel with another economist who was he was the chief economist of one of the big banks, but he got fired because he made some comment that wasn't seen as politically correct or something like that. And then, but he reckons that our economy would have been 3 times bigger now if it hadn't been for the ANC government, which is amazing. I mean, if you think 3 times the size, that's huge.
One thing that I heard is that the white farmers in South Africa produce majority of the food here. And so if they do push out the farmers, then that's probably going to hurt the economy even more. It seems like but most industries, like we were talking about the engineers, and because of the very extreme DEI, or it's not even inclusivity because they're really excluding all white people, but that's really affecting the whole country and the way that it operates. Like, the street lights aren't working, or electricity outages and various things like that. So
yes, it's had a tremendous impact, all of this DEI stuff and affirmative action. And together with that came corruption and the misuse of funds, especially government funds. And we've wasted so much money on this whole kind of social engineering project that's been going on for the last 20 or 30 years. But, talking about DEI and so on and inclusivity, I think, or diversity, I saw a thing in the US. There's a satirical website called Babylon Bee.
I saw that one. It's like they're like diversity. They'll finally achieve diversity once they exclude all the white people.
Yes. So there's now 100% diversity.
Yeah.
Because all the white people have been excluded. And and
they always post really good memes.
Yes. So 100% diversity, that would mean South Africa without white people. But of course, logically, then there's no longer any diversity because everything is just completely black. But that's a theme in South Africa, that things have to become black, and there's new legislation now that's going to impose very stringent quotas on all the medium sized companies and bigger. So it's going to become almost impossible for companies to employ white people.
Okay.
Which how does that strike you? I mean, you've had similar things in the US, but not as extreme as that.
No. It's almost like is if it's Kamala Harris's presidency or a Democratic presidency that stayed in power 50 years later, and like this is what the US would be.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. I've also often thought, what would it look like if one transposed our conditions onto, say, some European country or something, say a country like France, where there would be very strict racial quotas being imposed on companies, and and then it would just be, everything would be regulated according to these norms, but because somehow we accept it already as normal here. But if you transpose that to, say, another country overseas, then maybe people will have some sort of a shock in seeing what the situation is really like.
That's why I think that I believe that this story really isn't being told, because if there's people who are in favor of DEI and other things that are happening here in South Africa, and they want that to happen in the US, they don't want to see how it's going to negatively impact you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they don't want to talk about those aspects. I think they negate them, because anything like that, it will have some unintended consequences. And, the unintended consequence is that we no longer have energy, or the roads are no longer maintained, or the railways have completely collapsed. I mean, there are so many pictures and photographs and so on of railway lines in South Africa just in complete disrepair, or even they've even stolen the actual metal rails. I mean, there's just kind of the track is sort of, the left, or the support, whatever supported the track is left, but the rest is just gone, and the entire station building has been stripped and of everything in windows.
I guess that's the equity part. It's like they share all the pieces, and now you don't have a railroad.
Exactly.
Everybody has just a pole.
Yes.
Good. What are you going to do with it?
Yes. The trains have literally just stopped running, except for some parts of the country. I think in Cape Town there are still a few trains going. But in large parts of the country, the trains have just stopped completely. And we used to have a really extensive railway system. It was bigger than the one in the UK. We had more rail than the United Kingdom, which is sort of one of the top 5 economies in the world. So, that gives you an idea of what they've actually destroyed in this country in just a few decades.
The sad part is that it's so taboo to speak out against or about what is happening, and that many people are saying that, the people who are complaining were pro-apartheid, and that like they just try to discredit them completely because of that.
Well, I wasn't exactly pro-apartheid. Yeah, I was sort of more liberal when I was young, and but when I went overseas, I just started seeing this kind of caricature that people were making of South Africa, and that really shocked me, because it just seemed that, I mean, the country was a lot more nuanced than that, and we had certain problems, and you couldn't just make a caricature out of it.
What I like when I imagine a South African caricature, I imagine a person in kind of a safari outfit. This is like might. And they just, I don't know, they just kind of hang around all day. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, something like that. But also the kind of the caricature of the old political system, which had its faults and so on. But if you look at it, I mean, paradoxically, I think the old system, I mean, the ANC movement, which was a sort of a left-wing terrorist movement for most of its life until 1994, when it kind of morphed into a political party with the help of some Western countries and funding and so on. But they got a lot of their support also from the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union had a very, and even Russia today, had a very similar system to the old apartheid system, in that it was a sort of an ethnic federation.
Wow.
And I mean, so that's also quite crazy in the sense that, you know, the Soviet Union fought against another country which had a very similar kind of an ethnic federation system than the one they had. But in fact, there was in 1959 or thereabouts, there was a recommendation from the Soviet Academy of Sciences that told the South African Communist Party that South Africa should actually become a federation of workers and farmers' republics, a communist kind of people's republic. But the South African Communist Party rejected that, and they wanted this unitary centralized state that we've got at the moment, with all the powers centralized at the top, which has led to all of the corruption and inefficiency that we are experiencing now. Because if the country had been more federal or even confederal, then at least some parts of it would still have been functioning fairly well. Like for example, like the Western Cape, which at the moment is not, it's the only province not being ruled by the ANC. And it's better. I mean, if you go there, you can see the roads are being maintained, and, you know, the hospitals are better and everything.
Is there a way to get the ANC out of power?
Well, that's a good question. For the moment, it doesn't look like it. And there's also a big issue about whether, if they do really get voted out, if they would leave power voluntarily, you know, if they would abdicate power voluntarily. But in the last election, they only got 40% of the vote, but they are still governing as before.
Wait, so they didn't even receive majority of the vote?
No.
But then how come they're still in office?
Well, because they're now in a coalition with the previous opposition party, the so-called Democratic Alliance, or DA, who is a junior partner in government, and they've got a few ministerial positions. But in fact, I mean, the ANC completely dominates them in everything. So, and even now, you know, with you know, Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, going to the US to meet President Trump, part of the leader of the opposition is part of his delegation supporting him. So, you know, the opposition party is actually supporting the government in its stance against America.
That's kind of how they always say the conspiracy about they're like WWE fighters, like it's a fake fight pretty much, and at the end of the day,
something like that. Yes. And what really bothers me as well is that the opposition in South Africa, they almost share the same ideology as the ANC, because they also believe in affirmative action and in land reform, or taking away productive farms from people and you know, giving them to other people for ideological reasons. So there's actually very little where they actually differ. So that doesn't give me much hope for opposition in South Africa. And at the moment, we can see the opposition and the government cooperating and working together to implement the same policies as before.
It kind of sounds like a general theme amongst Afrikaners is there's not a lot of hope, because you can't speak out about it. Do you think most people are leaving, or most people?
Well,
you said that there's 2 million Afrikaners here.
Well, I mean, there are just over 4 million white people, and maybe there are 2.5 to 3 million Afrikaners. And
Oh.
you know, if you count the bilingual people, yeah, it's maybe
Oh, okay.
just over 3 million, I would say.
And it was about 3.5, maybe went down to 3.
Yes,
like
exactly.
Something like that.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of people have gone to other countries like Australia, New Zealand, UK. Some are even now going to the Netherlands, quite a lot of them. That's sort of the Netherlands is sort of rising as an immigration destination because the language is very similar to Afrikaans, so you know they fit in fairly easily there, and of course the US and Canada. So lots of people have gone there, but it's between 500,000 and 1 million, I would say.
There's like a big difference in my eyes of Afrikaner refugees, because that they're quite literally the definition of a refugee, where I call them like fake asylum seekers. Were coming to the US and they're like, our lives are in danger, and they're like, okay, come in, here's a phone, a housing, a car, and everything, you know. But you guys are actually facing persecution. And I mean, obviously, you can play a stereotype and make it as extreme as possible, but then that's where they're going to be like, oh, no, you're racist because you're saying that all Latins are this way, or like the Afrikaners are just like the perfect people, or something like that. But it does seem like you guys are just wanting to work. You're just wanting a normal lifestyle.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas other people are in pursuit of crime and theft. Basically, what they were doing to you guys is who they were allowing into the US.
Yeah, I see that parallel. Yes, definitely. You know, we are not, I mean, our first thought is not to leave the country and, you know, to immigrate to some other place, because we've been here more than 300 years. So our language is only spoken in this country and in Namibia. So we've got a whole culture that's developed over hundreds of years, and a history of being pioneers and foot trackers. We've got a whole history of being pioneers and fur trackers, and then, you know, fighting the British in 2 wars for our independence. So, and yeah, there's a whole story there that we don't necessarily want to leave behind just like that. But we are forced to, because of all the legislation directed against us, and also the hostility from these extreme left-wing groups and parties like the EFF and MK and even the ANC. And there was another thing called Black First, Land First. And they had even run by an individual named Andile Mkitama. That's sort of a cosa name.
Okay.
And, you know, and he was even more extreme than Malema, you know, calling for the killing of white people and so on. But he's now actually joined I think the MK party. And if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, you know, and if you know, people go on about apartheid being a crime against humanity and so on, but you can go back and look at all the speeches of the white leaders from that time, and never once did anybody call for the killing of black people. Not once. No one in authority, or a politician or leader of the opposition, or anyone. I mean, in fact, you know, they say that the one prime minister that we had that was assassinated in 1966 in Parliament, you know, he was stabbed to death in Parliament.
Stabbed, wow.
Yes. I mean, in actual fact, there was a stain on the carpet that they left there for, I mean, you know, they sort of cleaned it, but it was there for years afterwards. The spot where
like a symbol.
Yes, where he bled to death. And they say that he was the father of apartheid. They called him that, or you know, the liberal media and so on called him that. But you can look at all these speeches, and there's not one sentence in there where you can say that this guy was racist or demeaning to black people or anything like that. It's just astonishing. Like he's made out to be like the Adolf Hitler of South Africa, whereas now we've got these so-called democratic leaders who are making all these statements, calling for genocide against white people. So, in what sort of a world...
But you can't say anything about that, though.
Yeah.
Like, you can say something about a lie. Like, you can make something up, and everyone will be like, oh, yes. But if you tell the truth about what's happening, then...
Yeah, I mean,
just
even
horrible. And they pull out all the insults in the book.
Exactly.
And there's no conversation after that.
Yes. Yeah, the old flag that they call it the old flag, the orange, white, and blue flag that we used to have from about 1928 until 1994. And people fought under that flag against, during the Second World War, against Nazi Germany and in Korea, on behalf of South Korea and so on, and in the border war against Cuba. Yes. But they've declared the flag the symbol of hate speech, or just showing the flag is hate speech, and therefore you are committing crime if you show this flag. I mean, is that not completely...
It's like a lack of information, and shows that people don't actually know what happened.
Yes.
Just like you were saying about that guy who was the head, or I mean, he's the figure of the apartheid. They don't actually know who he was. They just have heard that he was a racist, horrible human.
Yeah, but they've never actually looked at what he said, what he wrote.
Yeah, they kind of do that to Trump quite a bit too, because I mean, I've also been seeing a lot of people on X saying that South Africans are some of the least racist people on earth. And so...
Well, I've often thought that, we are extremely tolerant towards cultural differences and so on.
Yeah.
I mean, we are, so we've got experience of really bizarre kind of beliefs and cultural practices and, rituals, slaughter of animals and, all kinds of stuff. And, people just, I don't know, do you know has anyone ever cast a spell on you?
I hope not.
Okay, but...
not that I know of.
In certain contexts in South Africa, that's the thing.
That's creepy.
Yeah, somebody can cast a spell on you.
Like if you accidentally butt someone in line, you turn around and they're like...
Well, it's kind of more sinister than that, in that, somebody can cast a spell on you and then you become ill.
Oh.
Or, people turn against you, or your wife
wants like an actual spiritual warfare.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you've got to do something in return, or you've got to go to the medicine man to cure you of that thing and maybe cause to counter spell.
What's medicine man?
Medicine man is like a witch doctor. Medicine man, what you call in the US medicine man.
Wouldn't it make sense? Oh, yeah. Witch doctor. That's crazy.
Or they call them here sangomas as well.
Like witch doctor just sounds like something that I heard in Alvin and the Chipmunks song. That's the only time I've really heard.
It's sort of a concept, or they also call them traditional healers. And they work with...
That's crazy that it's real.
With the spirits and so on. So we sort of used to all of that stuff. I mean, I knew somebody who worked in an investment bank in Johannesburg. I mean, to give it a concrete example now. And one day, and one of the black guys working there, one day he came to work in his suit, but he had some sort of an animal's gallbladder on his head.
Ew.
Yeah, sort of
Could you imagine just going to work and then seeing somebody with that on their head?
Exactly.
Like blood
and
that's just
I think it was actually
like that's tolerance.
yeah. And then,
You're just like,
but there
okay.
was a British guy who was the CEO or the I don't know the head of the local branch of this international bank, and his reaction was that yeah, he didn't have a problem with the cultural issue there, but he was concerned about the hygiene because this guy.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
come
yeah.
on.
But then it turned out that
That's crazy.
when the issue was discussed, there was a huge divide between, first of all, the foreigners working in the bank because they hadn't encountered anything like that before, and the white South Africans who felt, you know, this guy shouldn't come to work with his gallbladder on his head.
That's weird that there's a debate about that.
And then, the black people on the staff said, no, you know, there's nothing that he can do about that because
it's not happened, a part of dress code.
Yeah, he
like
because he'd been called to become a witch doctor or a sangoma, and that was part of the ritual, was to wear this thing, and it wasn't his own free choice. He'd been called by the spirits to become that, and then he was now being controlled by the spirits. So he had absolutely no choice in the matter. Yes.
Like, so you actually think that he didn't want to?
Well, who knows? But he was sort of possessed by these spirits, and he was going to have to go through this whole ritual of becoming a man of the spirits, or a sangoma, or a witch doctor in the process. All of these things are part of everyday life in South Africa, and we're very tolerant to huge cultural differences or different ways of seeing the world, and we deal with it, and we don't. I mean, we're not nasty towards people because they think differently. And so I think we are a lot more tolerant than probably many Europeans or Americans.
I just couldn't imagine somebody coming with a gallbladder on their head to work. I mean, that is like a level of tolerance that is very insane. I can imagine that would happen, and that there wasn't people just crying and screaming about how horrifying that was. And people would be going to the counselor for months. They wouldn't go to work anymore. You know, and so the closest thing that the US got to that was the eating the dogs and eating the cats thing, which could have been some type of sacrificial ceremony, or maybe they were eating it too, because I know sometimes people will eat birds or cats or ducks that they find just because that's what they think, or that's what they do. And so, but I mean, to have a tolerance for those things can mess with people's lives because those are their animals, or that's your like workplace. Wouldn't you think that it would be nice to have some type of like rules? Like, no, you cannot come to work with gallbladder on your head. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we, we've lived with this kind of stuff for centuries, and we don't hold it against people if they have different belief systems. And that makes us tolerant, and we also.
But I feel like it's not as much tolerance at that point. I feel like it's being complicit to something that perhaps morally you might not agree with.
True, there is that aspect too, but I think South Africa as a country used to function because we could accommodate different cultures, and and make things work in a very pragmatic way. But since we've had this very radical kind of government imposing all of these, American ideas like affirmative action and DEI and also stuff from Eastern Europe and ex-Soviet Union, communism and Marxism and extreme egalitarianism, that has created tremendous problems for South Africa, together with the corruption and the notion that merit is no longer the standard for the criterion for appointing people to certain posts or to jobs, and it's now all about filling racial quotas and social engineering and creating an egalitarian society. But in fact, we're not more egalitarian now than before. And in fact, the difference, it's got worse. Yeah, the Gini coefficient is now the highest in the world.
The what?
The Gini coefficient.
Gini coefficient?
Yes, I mean, that's a sort of scientific way of statistical way to measure rather, meet is afrikaans word, meet, but to measure the differences in wealth in a population. And ours is the highest in the world. So
is unemployment.
Exactly.
And crime.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not, the inequality is not necessarily between white and black. It's also between black and black, because you've now got this elite.
Yeah, that's what I was
that's been enriched by the system in all sorts of corrupt ways, and they are leading these sort of Hollywood lives and driving Mercedes G-Wagons and Bentleys and Rolls Royces.
Here?
Exactly.
And they don't get robbed?
Ferraris and stuff.
They don't get robbed?
Well, they live in gated communities and they've got, some of them have bodyguards and so on. So,
do the black people feel, because in the US there's a lot of people who say, oh, we all need to come together. They keep saying that. They say it in Spanish. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. The people united will never be defeated. Like, they keep chanting it everywhere they go. For any protest, they believe that it's relevant. And so wouldn't there be some type of sense in normal everyday black people and normal everyday white people who are like, these corrupt government people, they're just making themselves richer. We can be like united against them. Is there a sense of that or not really?
Well, not really. I think the white people complain a lot about that, but they also they feel intimidated, and they know if they had to say anything like against it, they would be cast as racists and insulted and stigmatized. So the criticism remains very muted, and it doesn't ever kind of boil over into a protest movement or anything like that. Whereas I think Africans are generally quite fatalistic. So they accept, and I think traditionally in African culture, there was also a huge social difference, say, between the chief and his subjects. And the chiefs had authoritarian powers. They had the power of life and death over the ordinary people. I mean, a chief could say, that guy should be killed, and then he would be killed. So the ordinary people, they just accept this as the way it is, and they're not going to try and overthrow it. Or, I mean, there are sort of protests and stuff like that, but the protests are more about people wanting sort of handouts or free stuff or free services. Or
do white Afrikaners protest for those things?
Not really. No, they protest more. The one thing they protest about is crime and violence, because that bothers them the most.
Mm-hmm.
But about the other stuff, they don't protest too much.
So it sounds like the black people protest for free stuff, and then the white people protest, don't steal our stuff.
Yes, something like that. Yes,
Okay.
that's putting it. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I think, putting it crudely, but it's correct. I think, yeah, it's kind of a bit simplified, but I think you're right that people are concerned about being robbed or their stuff being stolen, or being held up.
It's interesting because so I lived in Latin America, in Peru, back and forth for 5 years, and you could say that it's very similar in the sense that it's common for people who are of European descent to be wealthier, and that's just the way it is. And they get robbed a lot by people who could say that they have, I mean, that's very stereotypical, but like who are more indigenous people, perhaps. I mean, that's of course very stereotypical. It's not like the case, and it's just some people, but they come and like they rob you could say they're whiter. I mean, they're not as white as South Afrikaners, but I mean, they're of European descent. The difference, though, that is very shocking is that it's like they won't kill usually. Like Peruvian people, they rob a lot, but they don't kill you. Like they don't want to. They'll like maybe threaten you, but they just want your phone. Sincerely, they just want the stuff because of poverty, and that's something that they say on the mainstream media. No, that South Africa, everybody is struggling because of just poverty, so they're just stealing out of necessity. But it sounds like from the reports that it's a whole lot more than that, because they're not just like, hey, we want your land or we want to steal from you. They like make examples and leave stains on the floor, like you said, or just do the most horrendous things that other family members have to witness to traumatize them. It's not about taking from them, it's about torturing. That's what and obviously maybe that it's not all the time too, but that's what really is like, what is happening.
Yes, there is an extreme degree of violence here that you don't necessarily find in other parts of the world, and yeah, I mean that's a very complex issue to explain, or to why. I mean, from a sort of politically correct liberal point of view, they would say, yeah, that's because of apartheid. Apartheid made everybody more violent, but there was violence before apartheid, and we're now in so-called post-apartheid, and there's still violence. So I think the violence has been a constant in South Africa almost for centuries, because even in the 19th century, you had these so-called border wars in the Eastern Cape, where a lot of people were killed and they were raided, and the homes were burnt down, and there were also massacres in the Tel in Zululand at the time. So there is a propensity for violence in this part of the world, and I think one of the successes of the 20th century in South Africa was that we managed to kind of put a lid on this for a while.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could argue that some of the methods were, I mean, there was sort of a counter violence from the police and so on, but it wasn't extreme by any means. I mean, probably the police force in the US uses as much or even more violence than they did. But it managed to kind of calm things down and make people more productive and law-abiding. But over the last 30 years, we've just seen the whole thing going back to what it was in maybe the 19th century. It's now, I mean, there's no real law and order in South Africa. I mean, people can, I mean, there are statistics that you've got a 92% chance of getting away with murder. Only 8% of murders lead to a conviction. 92% of murder cases are never solved. So you know, and then if you're talking about theft and robbery and that sort of stuff, it's even worse. The police are completely ineffectual. The criminal justice system, they say it's broken. So yes, I mean, we sort of left to fend for ourselves. You've got to protect yourself. You've got to live in behind
Do you
the
guys
walls.
have a lot of guns here?
We do to some extent, not as much, not as many as in America, because they're making it more and more difficult to own guns. I mean, we've got to jump through hoops. And
the government is very armed, though?
Yeah, the government is armed. But the private citizens, I think there are about 2 million guns.
Do they have, I guess, militias or armed military groups that are not official?
Well, there are private security firms that are also armed. Yes. But now they're talking about, I don't know if it's been passed yet, but there's a new law about gun ownership by private security companies.
They're taking away.
Yeah, they want to take it away.
They were just telling me that security. Was it cameras? Like, you're not going to be allowed to have cameras up, or just basically they're making laws to minimize the security that you have, which is necessary.
Yes, which everybody is desperate for, and I mean that's sort of the one thing that private security is, the sort of one thing that makes life more tolerable.
Because technically, in a world where there wasn't the cameras, that security guy outside, all he has to him is a whistle. People could literally barge in here right now, just kill us, and then just be like, this is my home. They just live here? They could just live here then?
Yeah, well, there are kind of land invasions in South Africa taking place all the time because, especially in rural areas or even just on the outskirts of the cities. I mean, a lot of people who just settle on somebody else's land, and then the police would do nothing about that. And even if people go to court and try to get them evicted, either the judge doesn't care, or he would give an order, but the order would not be, put into practice by the police or defended by the police. And then eventually people just have all these strangers living on their land, and it becomes really unsafe to them. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of robberies.
Like, kind of forfeit it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And the government is totally making the things that are already happening just more and more easier to do.
Yes.
It's like, okay, you're already stealing land. Well, now it's a little bit easier to steal it because they're not going to be armed. Or
exactly.
When I was on the plane here, I got Wi-Fi, which was just enough to use social media. I couldn't watch YouTube videos. But you sent me there. You told me that we could go visit the white poverty settlement, and I was like, Google white poverty settlement images. What? I mean, I was just kind of mind blown because it's a little bit peculiar what's happening. I've seen people who live with dirt floors and hut roofs, and I mean, honestly, usually they're not white. And so it's like pretty crazy, like seeing these very, very impoverished kids looking like the stereotypical image of what you might think when you think about a very poor place in Africa, which obviously is not everywhere. But, like running outside without shoes, that's something that you don't see in a movie or anywhere. There's not a representation of a very, like, I hate to kind of say it, but like dirt poor white people usually. And that's why when I saw that, I was like, this exists? Like, you're telling me we're going to go here? Like, I kind of have a hard time believing it still. Like, it looked like...
Well, you see, people, there's no real safety net in South Africa as you have in Europe, where, I mean, if you don't have a job in Europe, you can get unemployment payments, or even if you've never worked, there's usually some sort of a minimum payout from the government that you qualify for.
Yeah. affordable housing
exactly.
or SNAP benefits and
that
those
sort of
kinds
thing.
of programs.
But here, once you lose your job and you're unemployable, or because you're white, and I mean, for example, the branch of my bank vary in four ways. Say about 25 years ago, if you went to that branch, there would be, say, there are 20 people working there, and maybe 2 of them were black at the time, and 18 were white. And now there are 20 out of 20 black people working there. So a white person can no longer work in a bank branch. So people before used to do that kind of job. I wonder, what do they do now? So, and also, something where all of this corruption and DEI and affirmative action have really hit us hard is at the municipal level. Because if you look at the stats around the salaries of municipal employees, they are extremely high compared to the rest of society. I mean, they're like even the guy, the janitor.
Oh, really?
Would get a very high salary. And we'd get, say, twice the salary of a teacher, for example. And then the kind of junior manager guy sits in front of the computer helping the people with their accounts or something. At the head office, he would get even more than that. And the junior manager would get more than R1 million, and per year, and the senior manager would get R2 million.
This is within the government.
Yeah, say municipalities.
Oh, okay. Those are city
in the government
governments.
as well. City governments.
City, okay.
But now, the effect of that is that in order to finance all of that, first of all, they're taking the money from capital spending on infrastructure and maintenance and that sort of thing, which is why we have so many water problems, electricity problems, and so on. But they are also increasing the local taxes all the time. And the cost,
but not for black people.
No, for white people. Yes,
okay,
mostly. And then what happens is that you're paying, and also the electricity has become more expensive, and the water. So eventually, what you're spending on your local taxes and water and lights and that sort of thing is now becoming a big chunk of your income, of your disposable income. So you're getting poorer.
So you have a hard time to get a job.
Yeah.
Can't really. And then if you do make any money, what percent of it would you say for
Well, I would say maybe 25% of your salary.
So it's almost like you're in a private business too, where they have to give 30% away too.
And then eventually, because people have to spend so much money on municipal accounts and that sort of thing, eventually they can't afford their homes anymore. And or they fall behind in the payments and so on. And then the bank would foreclose on them, and then they end up on the street, and they've got nowhere else to live, and then they end up in a place like that where they live.
And then what would happen to the house?
Well, it would just get sold to somebody else, or,
I mean, it sounds like it would go to somebody who has a job, isn't getting eaten by taxes because they're not white.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, and of course, the black areas are not. They don't really pay for anything. I think there was a statistic about Soweto, which is the sort of black area, large black area in Johannesburg, and only 7% of people there pay for municipal services.
Do other municipalities pay for it?
Well, I mean, essentially the rest of Johannesburg has to pay for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they maintain the same streets.
Yeah.
And
exactly, but they don't pay for it. And they don't pay for water and electricity. And they don't pay for local taxes.
So I was
only the only people there who pay for it are the businesses, like large companies and
Even if they're black
supermarkets.
owned?
Yeah, I suppose even if they're black owned.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought it's so funny because in the US they were giving, obviously it's not as extreme, but they're giving it special advantages to people who fall in certain categories of being of a minority. And one of the ways that you could do that is by being like, I am a pansexual, poly, whatever, something weird. And so now you're like, okay, I am a part of this thing. But the thing is like, you couldn't become black.
Yes.
I mean, like, is there a way, in a sense, somehow, even if it's on paper, or like, is there any way? I just don't understand how they're like, here's your tax bill because you're white. Like, how do they know that you're white? Like, could you identify as black?
Well, yeah, they say people self-identify and so on, but I think if the average white person goes to some government office and say, I'm black, they probably won't accept it. But it's all very complicated, all this bureaucratic stuff. And,
that'd be funny though.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, there are ways in which pensioners and so on can pay a bit less of this for their municipal accounts and so on, but it's a very arduous kind of a process to go through, and in practice, most people probably don't.
Probably need a lot of money and
yeah, but you also need a lot of time and so on to deal with the whole process, and and so in practice, most whites pay for all their accounts, and the ones who can't, they fall through the cracks and they end up in dire poverty. And especially if you lose your job, can't find another job because you're white, and the companies or the government don't employ white people anymore. If you can't find a job online, then you're really in dire straits.
And that's the point that I was making, not to make a joke about identifying as black, but I'm just saying that there's no way around it. I mean, you guys are really like up against the wall.
True. I mean, it is, unless something changes, it doesn't look all that good for us, because you fight. Yeah, as you say, we're up against the wall. You've got to fight this thing against you all the time, and you've got to make plans and get extra income, and have more than one job, and start a business on the side. Hustle for money.
Jeez. I'm wondering if you believe that Americans, either white or just Americans, would you say that they're more privileged than white South Africans?
Well, I think so, in the sense that the US has a much bigger economy, and so the average income is a lot higher. So, I think the general standard of motor vehicles in the US is probably higher than here. Even though, I mean, there are people here, especially the ones that are connected with the government and municipalities, and that earn these extremely high salaries. I mean, and drive these really fantastically expensive vehicles. In Johannesburg, especially, you're in the parts, sort of more in the northern suburbs and wealthier parts of Johannesburg. I've spent some time in Fairfax County, next to Washington, D.C., and that's supposed to be the richest county in the U.S.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
And I didn't see as many expensive cars there as over here, because I don't think you've got an elite group like that in the US, with as much, or they might have the same income, but they don't spend it as ostentatiously as they do in South Africa. Yes.
Wow. Yeah, I've always wondered about that. because in Peru, it's like they have what, I don't know if it's an actual term or it's just something that the people I was around came up with, but like a bubble. And so there's this group who's more affluent. They go to private schools. They have their American schools, their German schools, and they just really kind of hang around each other. And in the US, that I've always wondered if there's some little tiny group or neighborhood, but then I guess I don't know. Like for in South Africa, it sounds like it would be the people who are really high up in the government.
Yes, exactly.
In the US, I don't know if there's a specific place where they all go, maybe like Bohemian Grove or something like that.
Oh yes, yeah. I think there are certain suburbs in Johannesburg where they all want to live. Maybe parts of Pretoria too, and also Cape Town. The more expensive parts of Cape Town, you find them there as well. Yes, and that's where they buy the big houses and live it up with French champagne and
the people in the government, these very wealthy people with all these supercars and mansions and gated communities, are they black or white, or is it mixed?
I think mostly black. There are still some wealthy white people who had private businesses.
Those are the ones who are very liberal.
Exactly. Yes, and they would also live in those areas. But I think they are getting fewer. I mean, a lot of them are immigrating or have immigrated, and others, even the wealthy ones, don't advertise their wealth.
Okay.
I've been in discussions or in conversations where people start saying that, sort of wealthy white people would say, well, I think I want to get a cheap phone because when I go to the shop, I don't want somebody to see I've got an expensive phone. And if they steal my phone, then all my banking apps are on there and so on. And that's dangerous to me. So I want to get a cheap phone. And I also know of one very wealthy lady who, she had a lot of diamond rings and stuff and maybe an expensive watch. And she went to the shopping center and some Nigerians or some criminals followed her back home, and she was held up at gunpoint. She lived in a gated community, but as she arrived at the gate, she was held up at gunpoint, and they took all her rings and watch and all that stuff. And now she doesn't wear any jewelry anymore. And if you see her and she doesn't wear expensive clothes or anything like that, if you see her there, you wouldn't say that she's wealthy. So the whites have become a lot more modest, and they don't just flaunt their wealth or anything like that because of the crime problem.
It's also very interesting that you say the whites, because in the United States, there's white people. I mean, I would consider myself white. It seems like South Africans are like very white in the sense that maybe they have but they're not very mixed with other cultures. In the US, I feel like there's a lot of Hispanic mixes or just German, French, Italian, Chinese, Asian, just all the continents mixed together a little bit. And so you have people who are white, but here it's like it is very distinct of white and black. It's not like there's so many mixed people.
Yes, true. I mean the difference is fairly stark, I would say. The sort of physical, visual difference.
Yeah.
But there's also the cultural difference because as explained before, in the US or France or somewhere UK, people of African descent are normally westernized and they speak English or French or whatever. But over here, people black people still speak their own languages most of the time as well. So
yeah,
there's
that's
also
a good
a
point that I
language
didn't even
difference.
mention. That we talked about that earlier. Like, there's a lot of interracial couples as well, and so there's not really white or black. I mean, there kind of is, but not so stark.
Yes. And I mean, people work together and maybe they do sport together or something like that. But, generally speaking, each one, most of the communities keep to themselves. And especially the Afrikaners, because black people have sort of opted, because English is a bigger language and international language, they prefer English as their second language, and their children go to English schools and English universities and so on. Whereas the Afrikaners have kept their own schools, churches, and so on. If you go to an Afrikaans church, most of the time it's 100% white.
And it's done in Afrikaans?
Exactly, yes.
Oh, okay.
And it's specific style of Calvinist, kind of Dutch Calvinist church, that's specific to us. And that, it's been like that since the Reformation or something. So it doesn't have all these sort of, I mean, in Africa now, churches are a big thing. And there's a lot of money in it as well. And,
what, religion?
Yeah, religion. And, in places like Nigeria and...
Like what religion?
Well, Christian religion, but it would be, I mean, there's also an element where, there would not only be a preacher, but he would be a prophet. It's called a prophet.
Oh, no.
And he can make you wealthy and stuff like that. But and he can perform miracles and heal people.
Oh, great.
Things like that.
Yeah.
So you find people like that, and a lot of them have also been attracted from all over Africa to South Africa, because South Africa is still the wealthiest country.
Well, that's
on the
what
continent.
I was like, if they accept so many immigrants, I mean, it's just going to be another African country, because Africa's huge. Do you know what the population of the continent is?
Well, I think it's coming close to 1.5 billion.
Wow.
And it's projected to rise to 2.5 billion.
What?
Yes. I mean, they're going to be more.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. They're going to double? Well, like...
Yeah, it's going to double in the next 20, 30 years.
Jeez, that's in my lifetime.
Exactly.
Like, in my kids' lifetime, they will experience double. And I also wonder how that will affect immigration, not just to South Africa, but also to
the rest of the world.
The United States. I saw one lady on an X post. She was a black lady. She was like, one day white children are going to say, I wish I was black.
Okay. Yeah.
I was like, well, I think that
impact.
White people can be happy about being white and black people can be happy about being black, because they're characteristics of ourselves, and we all have to accept ourselves. And being a different skin color is not going to make you better. It's the content of your character. And yeah, that's what I think. What do you think?
Yes, I agree with you. And I think over here we've traditionally espoused the notion that, each to his own, and if you want to practice a certain culture and speak a certain language and so on, that's your right, and you should develop that. And we didn't take the same line as maybe the French. In their colonies, they wanted black people to become Frenchmen, to behave like Frenchmen, to speak French, and to have a French culture and so on. So that wasn't our idea here. We wanted everybody to practice their own culture and to develop within their own context, as it were.
But they don't feel that way to you, though.
No, I think, partially, no, they don't feel that way to us. I mean, I don't know exactly what their idea is, but they seem to have the idea that we should be dominated everywhere, in government, in politics, and socially, economically. And until they've achieved complete and utter domination, their work is not finished.
That's why it's not, like, I see equality a lot. For example, I was in Denver where they have a mural on the wall that says power and equality. But if you have equality, then there shouldn't be someone who's more powerful than another.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Whereas, no, the notion of supremacy and domination is very strong, and they want to also see it symbolically in all kinds of ways. And as long as there is, there's a group of white people who seem to be wealthier than the average, or who have their own school or own club or own society or whatever, then they think that's a problem. And I mean, for example, there are these two communities, one in the Northern Cape called Orania. You must have heard of that.
I haven't.
And one near Pretoria called Kleinfontein. Now, both of those happen to be 100% Afrikaans and white. And the people and they're sort of private communities, and where you kind of own a share in, it's almost like a business, the whole community, and you buy a share in it and you live there. And they've also got their own schools and hospitals and clinics and so on.
Okay.
But it's the main, I would say the defining characteristic is that it's you have to be of Afrikaans culture to live there. And now lately, these two areas have drawn a lot of flack, and especially this radical left-wing political party, the EFF, has threatened to, to overthrow them, or
and they're
to have
just
it be declared illegal, because having maybe 1,000 or 2,000 white people living together there, that's perceived as a threat. Whereas, I mean, you can go to some areas, say in the Eastern Cape, rural black areas there, where, maybe some of the kids there, 5 or 6 years old, might never have seen a white person before.
Yeah.
And it's all just completely African. And I mean, I've heard,
like, so they do their
I
own
haven't
thing.
quite, yes. I haven't quite been to those isolated areas myself, but I know my one son's driven through there, and then he got lost, and he tried to ask the way, because there wasn't, there wasn't any form of
cell phone
mobile signal or anything like that.
Yeah.
And nobody there could speak English or Afrikaans, so and he couldn't speak cosa, so
that's so scary.
Yeah, I mean, but I've heard from other people that they've come across kids there who've never seen a white person before, in the real life, and they wanted to touch their hair and so on, because
yeah.
So that exists. You've got all over the country. You've got communities that are 100% black and tribal and whatever, and that isn't a problem. But if you've got some small white community there organizing themselves along cultural lines, then it becomes a huge issue. So and surely there's something such as freedom of association.
Yeah.
that you can. I mean, if you're a Muslim, you can associate with other Muslims and have a mosque, and you don't allow Christians there.
I mean, when we talk about businesses or just work life or social life, everyone should have the liberty to hang out with who they want to.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't want to hang around people of a certain culture, that's a personal preference.
Sure.
And I mean, you don't have to go out and be like, I don't want to hang around these people. But I mean, that is something that you should be allowed to do.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's a Russian Orthodox church there between Johannesburg and Pretoria, and presumably the people who go there are of Orthodox faith and so on. So, why not?
Yeah.
And they probably speak Russian inside the church as well. So
yeah, like you said, you guys were being very tolerant, even to their religious beliefs, which sound extreme with the gallbladder on the head, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, but the tolerance isn't the other way around, and I guess people just don't want to believe that white people could be becoming unprivileged. I guess that would be the word.
Yes, I think there's also a stereotype of the so-called white privilege, and that white people have an easy life, and but it's not the case at all. And
I mean, there could be so many privileges, like on a broader scale. Like you could have tall privilege, pretty privilege. I mean, just kind of ridiculous to associate things just to a privilege.
Exactly.
Because people don't see themselves. Well, I don't know. I mean, everybody has their own advantages, and it's up to each person to use those.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
I'm not saying white privilege, not saying to use white privilege. I'm saying if you grew up in a family that is, I don't know, very energetic, then you can use that.
Sure.
It's not just about like your skin.
Yeah, if your dad was a businessman and he taught you about business from an early age.
Yeah, and you're business privileged there. Yeah. Or you're socially privileged. Yeah. You're gifted in sports.
Exactly.
You're gift privileged.
Yeah. I mean, I know somebody who is very keen golfer, and he's a scratch golfer, and now his son is trying to be a professional golfer in the US. He went there, and
that's awesome.
But
that's cool.
So he grew up in a kind of
he's golf privileged.
He's golf privileged.
Yeah, he's a part of the high life. He's too privileged.
Yes, although becoming a professional golfer in the US is not an easy thing. There's such a lot of competition for that.
It has to be expensive too.
Yes, it's incredibly expensive. And I mean, if you maybe win some student tournament or something, but you get $100 prize money, but it costs you $1,000 to get there. You
have to get like sponsors or something by Gatorade or someone. I forgot what I was gonna say. We were speaking about privilege. Oh, and then if you just attribute other people's success to the fact that they're privileged, then you're not ever going to understand how to actually accomplish things, because you're just like, oh, well, that person got lucky. But it's not about luck. I mean, the farmland that the Afrikaners have wasn't luck. It didn't just happen.
No, it takes a lifetime to build up a farm, or so they say. You've got to start from nothing almost. If you see the African bush and you imagine, making a farm out of that. I mean, first you've got to clear some of the bush, and then you've got to get water from somewhere and build a
But then someone comes and says, oh, no, you're privileged. You have this nice land. You got lucky. Now it's mine. But then the land is just going to go to ruins because they think that it was just luck, or that it was some type of, they need to do some spiritual sacrifice so that the stuff will grow or something like that.
Yeah, I think that that exists as well. I mean, there's a whole area there up north where they've got a rain queen there,
Yeah.
and she makes the rain, or is said to make the rain. And yeah, I happen to know someone. She's also an author, and she grew up in that area, and her father was a farmer there, and her father had passed away, and she inherited the farm, but there was some land claim on it, and she lost it. So,
I mean, and this is it's devastating, and it's kind of bizarre to have a casual conversation with because you're an Afrikaner, and so I mean, and I'm sorry that you guys are going through all of this. I think I should have said that a long time ago. Actually, we had like such a long conversation, but I'm sorry that I can't imagine how like feeling stuck and that there's not. I just feel like it sounds negative, but I don't know if that's just the way it is.
I think we deal with things on a day-to-day basis, but putting it that way, when you look at it from outside, yes, we do have a problem, and we rationalize things and we adapt to things, but once I often get the impression when I go overseas. I mean, for example, I went to Europe to visit my daughter, and then after a few days you start relaxing in a way, because you're no longer looking over your shoulder, and you're no longer wondering whether somebody is going to grab your phone or
I had the opposite effect when I came here. I was like,
yes,
don't be dumb now, because exactly. I was like, oh, I'll put my camera on my neck so that way I have it accessible. I'm like, why did I even bring it? I was like, maybe I should just record with the small one this time, because
and then suddenly because you just come used to for example, I was working in a library in a smaller city in Belgium, and with my laptop, and so I thought to myself, no, I've got to go to the bathroom now. Maybe I should take my laptop along.
Yeah.
But then I realized, okay, well, I'm in Belgium now, so I can maybe leave my laptop.
When I was on the airplane to use the restroom, I was like, wait, do I have to like hide my phone? I'm like, but we're on an airplane. Yes. People don't steal on airplanes, but we're going to South Africa. I was like, I didn't know anything. I was like, just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, so we completely in that mindset where we have to look out all the time. Where do I park? Is this a dangerous area?
I think Americans take that for granted a lot. I know that there are dangerous areas.
But I've heard that in the US, for example, for example, there close to Washington, I stayed for a while in a house there, and there was a lady there who'd come to visit her dad, and she was going to go on holiday or something like that, and she was going to leave her car there, and she left the keys of the car inside the car. I mean, over here,
so that she doesn't have to look through her purse when she gets back.
Yes, I mean, over here, something like that would just be completely insane, because you would imagine that your car would be stolen in the next 5 minutes.
I don't know, the bar on the wheel.
Yeah,
some people take out the wheel.
Yes. Yeah,
the tire clip.
And and people have got secret switches inside the car to switch off the electrical system. All sorts of stuff.
Interesting.
And but I've heard also that say they're in New England, in Vermont and Maine and these sorts of places. I mean, people would just leave their car running in the winter or whatever, while they go to the shop. Well, anybody can get in the car and just drive away.
I did that by accident one time. I went into the store and I was like, where's my keys? And I had an old 2004 Ford Focus. And so it was like really loud. And then as I was approaching the car, I was like, there's no way that I left the car running in the parking lot this whole time. But I mean, just also look at people's houses, how they don't have gates or bars. People could walk up to your front door. Isn't that kind of creepy and scary that somebody could literally just go to your the door?
Yes. Yeah,
but they don't for the most part.
Yes.
I mean, we really trust in each other, and I think that is something that I really love about the US, that it'd be sad if other people who came in who they're the reasons why you need the walls, but then they get access to no walls. And we saw that happening a little bit. I mean, there was over 20 million illegals illegals that came into the US. So
yes, also in parts of Germany, a while ago, when I was there, I also saw, people just leaving their bicycles. The bicycle isn't locked or anything like that. Whereas in Amsterdam, apparently, bicycle theft is a real thing.
That'd be so awkward just to be walking. I don't think they drive too much, right? But you see someone else on your bicycle. Like, what are you going to do?
Well, that happened to me once.
Just let it go. You saw someone riding your bicycle?
I was actually, I went for a ride on my bicycle, and then I stopped at a supermarket to buy one of those energy drinks or whatever.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, okay, so I left the bicycle at the glass door where I could sort of watch it.
Just real quick.
Yeah. And I went to the fridge and I got the energy drink, and as I turned around, I saw the wheel of my bicycle was gone.
They stole the wheel?
No, but I knew the whole bicycle was gone. So I ran outside the supermarket, and sure enough, there was a black guy on my bicycle cycling away. But instead of going, it was on an uphill, and instead of going downhill, he went uphill. So if he'd gone downhill, I would never have caught him, because, he was
chased him?
I chased him. And then
Are you serious?
Yes, and I got my bicycle back.
Nice.
Yes.
That's terrifying.
But only because he went uphill. If he'd gone downhill, I would never have caught him. So, yeah.
Wow.
So, but I didn't really know what to say to him because, I suppose.
Just entitlement? Really?
And he said, no,
I
just wanted to feel what it was like, or something like that, some lame excuse like that.
At least he was kind of like, oh, oopsies, instead of aggressive about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got to, then that taught me a lesson that you can't even leave your bicycle for like 30 seconds while you're fetching the drink from the fridge there.
They were telling me on the way here that I was like, wait, do they ride horses? And she said that they ride donkeys and sometimes ride goats.
Yeah, I suppose it's possible. I haven't quite seen that.
Here, everybody has a car.
Yes.
And then I don't think that they would ride donkeys much in South Africa.
Well, you've got in some rural areas, you've got donkey carts, but there would be two donkeys and then drawing a cart.
A cart?
A cart, like a wagon, little donkeys.
Oh, I see.
You find that in the Northern Cape and places like that.
Cart. Yeah. Like one of the... Like Mary,
well, it would just be a sort of a, thing on two wheels. The two
donkeys are the worst, though. Donkeys are horrible.
Well, the ones that are properly trained, I think they can be useful animals.
Really?
And I've even heard. there was some group in the UK of ex-South Africans, and they had a charity going to save donkeys in Zimbabwe, because apparently they are so ill-treated there and worked to death and that sort of thing, that they've got a charity where people buy these donkeys and then they kind of heal them and give them, veterinary treatment and whatever, and they've got some donkey sanctuary for them.
Man.
Can you believe it?
No,
But
that's
yes,
sad.
that's also something that a lot of white people are involved in South Africa, is animal welfare and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I was gonna say, just like thinking about those donkeys and how they live, and then thinking about a donkey somewhere else in the world on like a nice farm and stuff. It's just really interesting, the reality of the world that we live in, and how, I don't know, I guess just how there's like very extreme poverty in some places, and I don't know, sometimes it's hard to make an explanation out of it. So, well, this person was born there. Why was I so grateful to be born in the US? You know?
Yes, an American once told me that, being born American is a great advantage in the world, or something like that. Well, who knows?
I mean, I believe that any person, no matter where they begin, can accomplish tremendous. They can change the world.
Sure.
And that doesn't matter where you live. It's just interesting, people have different struggles, and I think that is, in a way, an unfortunate truth. I guess it might be easier for me to say, but it's an unfortunate truth that in some ways kind of has to be accepted. I don't think that we could get rid of poverty completely, or do you kind of get what I'm saying? Because I feel like there's also this idea that, well, there's so much poverty, there shouldn't be really rich people then. Because why is it that they have billion-dollar jets when this person doesn't have food for the day? And in a sense, there's like, well, sometimes like that's just the way it is. But like also to care for them and help the poor, feed the poor, and I don't know, just I hope that makes. Does it make sense what I'm saying in a way?
Yes. I think. Well, around about probably 1700s or 1800s. I mean, there was this guy Malthus that had a very pessimistic view of the population explosion, and he also, I think, argued that poor people have too many kids and
well,
so on.
Yeah, they just do.
But I think since then, we've moved on, and but there's still an argument like to be made for I think demography and poverty, and it seems that well, a lot of the poorer areas in the world, I mean, they had a very high infant mortality as well. So the population kind of stayed the same for long periods of time. But now, thanks to Western medicine and food aid and so on, you find that there's now, especially in Africa, there's a population explosion going on. And where is that going to lead us? I mean, there is a theory that Africa, I mean, they talk about the youth dividend or something in Africa, that Africa is going to be successful because it has such a young population compared to the rest of the world. But somehow, I don't think that theory has borne any fruit yet. And it seems to me, a few years ago, people were still talking about the great African economic awakening, but it seems that they've run into a lot of debt problems again.
What?
African countries have run into a lot of debt problems.
Debt.
Yes. So, and the growth rates are not great, and not high enough to keep up with the growth in population. But in theory, I suppose, the whole world, food production could provide enough food for the entire world population.
I just think that there's this idea that some people believe that if there wasn't wealthy people, then we wouldn't have poverty. And that's the point that I'm trying to make.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I hope I was being sensitive enough and
I'm not too sure if there's a real causal link between the rich people and the poor ones, because the rich people seem to, they get their wealth from the rich countries. And they're not really involved in sort of slave labor in some poor country. The tech billionaires in Silicon Valley, they're not exploiting people in some poor country in Asia or somewhere. Although there could be maybe production of some commodity somewhere where there's exploitation of poor people. But I think it's it's a big topic, poverty in the world, and why it exists. But I think, philosophically, up until now, we've had scarcity in the world. There's never been enough wealth to support the entire world population. And for example, in South Africa, if you had to divide the existing wealth into, among 60 million people, I think then everybody would maybe, I'm not sure what the exact figure was, but, for argument's sake, everybody would maybe get a couple of $100 once or something like that. It's not going to solve.
Well, I also heard, if they took all the money in the world, divided it equally amongst everybody, pretty soon it'd end up in the same hands. Because it's the philosophies, the things that they do, their belief system that materializes and creates the societies. And so if a person adopts a new philosophy, they'll begin to have new things, better things, they can grow. However, if they stay with the same mindset,
sure.
Would they?
Yes, I think there was a book by, who Samuel Huntington is. He was the guy who wrote the thing about the clash of civilizations.
Wow.
Around about the early 90s or thereabouts. But he also wrote another book called Culture Matters. Mm-hmm. So we argued that the culture of a certain society is what creates the wealth.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you've got some country that, practices kind of polygamy and, you've got a very strong kind of hierarchical system where maybe there's no space for innovation, or it's very traditionalist and so on, then you're not going to get a huge
casino market.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
Things like that, yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to have huge economic growth and innovation and invention and everything that goes along with it. Whereas if you've got another, there was also the argument around, I think by Weber, around Protestantism and economic success. The Protestants were very individualized, and therefore they tended to be economically successful, and they had a strong work ethic as well.
Oh,
Whereas the Catholic societies were more traditional and quite hierarchical as well. So you had sort of very wealthy landowners and aristocrats and who kept all the wealth to themselves, and the rest of the people were poor, and there wasn't much social mobility. And whereas in the Protestant societies at a certain level, it suddenly took off, and you know, in Northern Europe and US, yes, you had a huge wealth creation as a result, and it was related to the dominant religion in those societies.
Would you like, what do you believe about some people believe that Jewish people control the presidency, or that all the federal banks, and they're just the most wealthiest, most powerful elite group of people in the world? Is that, would you, I mean, we're talking about religion and how that correlates to wealth, and there's a lot of talk about Israel, and also there's been people talking about South Africa and how that relates to Israel somehow.
Yes, well, I think they're making the link also between this court case that South Africa has against Israel at the International Court of Justice.
There's a court case?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, and there's a theory that Iran gave the money to South Africa to make this court case.
Iran gave Israel money
gave money to South Africa.
Oh, Iran gave
to
money
make
to
a court case against Israel.
So, like, Iran is trying not to put their face on it, but wants the case.
Yes.
What is the case about?
Well, it's about Palestine, and they're saying that that Israel is committing a genocide against the Palestinians, and that's what the court case is about.
And like, what would South Africa's why would they be motivated to stand up for that? I mean, they're getting money from Iran, but I guess then why does Iran want Palestine to be free?
Yeah, I suppose because they're also fellow Muslims or something of that order.
Because they're what?
I mean, the Palestinians are million Muslims, and the Iranians are Muslims, so there's some sort of Muslim solidarity.
Oh, okay.
So that's been a big issue. This court case that South Africa has been making against Israel. Yeah, but it's really it's been nice talking to you. And
thank you.
Yeah,
I really learned a lot.
Oh well, I'm glad.